Hello and welcome to Scrapbooking Station. Good start the year, start the decade with a unique structure. It's called the swing easel. And so it does fold flat, but then it props up in a really pretty display. So I can go through several variations, several sizes. I'm going to put the camera over my shoulder and we'll get started. So I'm going to begin this structure by creating a 5.5-inch square card. So that's how it's going to be when it's flat, and you want it oriented so that it is a tent-fold card. And if you're starting from scratch, it's just 11 by 5.5, and then you want to score the middle at 5.5, and that creates your square. Now, the front of your card, you're going to want to add 3 additional scores, and I'm going to need to turn this so I can see. But from the bottom, you want to go score at 2.5, and I'm using a scoreboard, but you could use your paper trimmer to do this. And 3, and then 3.5. That's kind of the basis of your card blank. And so now we're going to put some cuts into it. And I'm not going to do that on air, but what you want to do is come in 1 inch from each side. But you're going to want to leave this strip, and I'm going to call it the spinner strip. You want to leave that uncut. So you come in 1 inch, go down, 1 inch across, 1 inch from the outside up to the score line, and then do the same thing on the back. Again, leaving this attached to the blank. So let me go do that, and I'll be back with that piece. Okay, once I finish with my score lines and my persnickety cuts, this is the piece you end up with, and you just want to give these two mountains a good crease as you do that center score line. And so when it mails totally flat, and then it picks up and you put a stopper. Now I'm going to talk about some of these decorations, how you can move over and under some of these elements on the card, but I don't want to lose anybody because I don't like this persnickety cutting. And just like the 2-piece stepper, so instead of making a single piece of cardstock into a stepper, you can do this with 2 pieces also. So using a cutting die to cut out the aperture, and then replacing this little swing piece or this little border element. And we're going to talk about that later, but like I said, I don't want to lose a bunch of folks because you don't like cutting into a card this way or a card base this way. So let me get some of these basic elements on. Again, I want to do the square, cover the square. I've cut a piece of 5.5 by 2.5 that's going to cover this, so I'm going to attach it and then trim it, and then I'm going to work on the inside a little bit, but then we'll be back to work on the focal. I went ahead and finished this first project because there are far fewer restrictions than originally I thought, and really the only restriction is this first ribbon of score lines. So that first 1/2-inch shelf, you don't want anything extending from your square to the sides. But other than that, the bottom, there's one restriction in that you don't want anything that you put on here to extend beyond that bottom edge of your square. And that's so that when you prop it up, there's nothing interfering with it standing flush. The other thing is, let's see, going over. So I went over the top of my square and I went over on the sides, but again, just avoiding that single 1/2-inch on either side. And I like my card to be within the base card size, so 5.5. If you don't mind making a larger envelope for your cards, you can go anywhere up and around here, again, just avoiding this one little single area. You've got that bottom frame area. You can have things coming up because, again, this is just going to swing down and this is just going to swing up. So as long as you avoid that 1/2-inch, you're good to go. So that's the way it turned out. And the other thing I did, because this is somewhat persnickety, I don't know, if you have someone that doesn't know cards that well, are they going to get how this is supposed to display? I added another little square here, and I'm going to take a photo of the standing piece and put a little to display, and then add the photo of it propped up. Of course, this is my stopper, so it's raised up on foam squares. Materials I use, well, first off, I put this on point, and it is a square cutting die from eBay. Materials, or the pattern papers, I got from a friend. So, don't have much of those. I persnickety cut some of those, and then when I added it to this cutting die, I actually cut the die first, added some of my persnickety cut leaves, and then put it through the die cut again so I get the same holes. And that's how I did that. Of course, I got my ribbon here that extends up beyond that bottom frame. So the rest of the stuff is Stampin' Up. So Stampin' Up cardstocks, inks, stamps, and ribbon. Okay, I'm going to leave photos of this. I'm going to move right into die cutting this focal square in lieu of using your paper trimmer. For the second project, the size is going to be exactly the same, and so the score lines are going to be exactly the same. And so I've got a 5.5 by 11. First off, I did that center score at 5.5. And then the next thing I did was take the front, and I used a cutting die, and I cut out my square. And so I use a 3.5-inch square, but I'm hoping you can see that we're going to be changing this aperture. So we're going to be changing the shape because we can. You don't have to use a straight edge anymore. But let's go ahead and put this together as is. Now, of course, I lose this connection piece. And all this is another strip of cardstock. It's narrower than the 1/2 inch. And so, once again, once I take out my center here, and I just eyeballed it, because this is just going to flip back, that's going to flip forward, so it doesn't really need to be totally perfectly square. It looks nicer if it is, but if you miss by a little bit, I don't think anyone's going to notice. And then you take your strip, and so you know this is 1/2 inch width, and you want to be a little bit less than that. So this is like 7/16, so a little more than 3/8. And then I just attach it on either side on the back end. And so really quickly, a lot more quickly, I've got the base for my card. Of course, the other thing, since I used a patterned piece of cardstock, I don't have to cover my frame. And so the rest is going to be the center. Now, to go ahead and get your swivel square, for this first sample, we're going to make it exactly, this is actually the square that came out. So it was like this before I die cut it. I went ahead and cut another in black, because great thing about replacing this is you can do it in a different color, a different pattern, whatever you want to do. The only thing is, when you attach it, lay this really flat. Put your adhesive only in the middle. You don't want to go onto the edges. And then position this exactly back where it came from on your card. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and add some embellishments, and I'll be back with this finished piece, because I want to do some other variations using other shapes and in different sizes. So once again, leave photos of this kind of piece in progress, and then take a look at the finished piece. So the second project finished up with no real surprises. Again, I kind of extended some elements into that center square portion, extended some of my center square portion elements outside, again, avoiding that 1/2 inch strip. I did raise this up. You need to be careful about the dimension on that, because when someone gets it, it could catch if you're too deep. And the other thing I changed is this really doesn't want to flop, and so I did not raise my interior up on foam squares. So that is just a like 90-pound cardstock that is holding that in place. Did the inside again, and I might actually take pictures of this back, because this is just so much cleaner. So it's more handmade than homemade, as in the other one when you use your paper trimmer. But use that frame that I had left over to go ahead and just do something here. Again, probably would stick the displayed photo of this piece, so that when they get it, they know how to prop it up. And an envelope. Okay, let me leave photos of that, because now what I want to do is another die cut. Like I said, I want to change the shape, and so I've already started on that. I also want to increase the width of my card, because I'm not really a fan of square cards. Postage is funky, and so we're just going to mess with this a little bit. I did take it a step farther from the last time you saw it, but I'm going to cover it again. So I've got what we started with was square, a 5.5 inch square, and I'm not a fan of square cards, and so I'm going to extend it. So I'm going to finish with a 5.5 by 7, because I like rectangular cards. And so I already know that these score lines are going to be in the same place. As long as I've got a 5.5 inch height on my finished card, I'm going to score at 2.5, 3, and 3.5, and I hope I was clear on that. But before I cut my aperture and before I did my scores, I went ahead and covered, and I used a 2.25 inch piece of pattern paper, a little bit shorter, so I'd have my white borders, because I know that this is going to be at 2.5, and so it's a lot easier to cover it and then die cut it. And so I used an arch this time, and I told you I was going to change the shape. And then I went back and scored and then added my little less than a half-inch strip. And I'm going to change the color because I can. So I'm going to introduce red into this Valentine's Day card. So let me make some more pieces because I'm not going to use that. I might use this on the back, actually, of this focal. And then I'll be back. In making this third piece, I learned a few things. And the first is when you saw that photo, what happens when you prop this up is that this window drops down. And so I created that arch, which initially was just the gray, but it looked out of proportion because this dropped down, but this was still high up. And so I just created a shadow, but I don't know that that is such a cool idea. But more importantly is this inch. Because you've got a half-inch here, a half-inch here, what really needs to happen is no matter what cutting die you use, and actually no matter what height the card is, you need to leave yourself an inch. I had to end up trimming it, and if you look at the photo, when I have that photo of the flat piece, I've got a gap in here because I actually had to cut off a little bit. Other than that, it all works together really nicely. Materials here are Stampin' Up! Pattern papers and cardstock. I got some specialty from Kanban, and then I've got lots of cutting dies. So I've got several that come from China. So I've got the nested arches, the sentiment dies, and then the bow and nested hearts. And then the focal is done with the teddy bear from Tattered Lace, as is the stamp. So I just chose and kisses in here, and so I've got the cutting die and this. So what I want to do now, of course, I'm going to do the envelope as well. And when I was doing the envelope, 5.5, it's just a weird card size. You can't buy card blanks that are 5.5 tall, and really making the envelope is kind of a problem with the 5.5. So I'm going to leave photos of this finished piece, and then we're going to look at some different heights for our swing easels. I've just got the finished piece for this fourth project because what I've done, well, first off, like I said, we're going to decrease the height because 5x7 is a much more natural card size. Also, a lot of people buy card blanks, and a 5x7 card blank would work for this. Now, because you shrunk your card height, what you need to do is adjust your half-inch score lines. So you want to start at 2 1/4, then go to 2 3/4 and 3 1/4. And then everything comes together exactly the same. Also, I'm paying attention. This die cut, this is a series of nested circles. And so the circle I used in here, I want to make sure it's an inch up from my card bottom. And that's how all this came together. And it displays really pretty. So like I said, this is much more typical. And I did put a little stopper. And that's how it's going to display. And so I've just got a bunch of nested, added some pearls. The cardstock, this watercolor cardstock, comes from Create & Craft. These are Spellbinder circles, and then I've got some pearls from Hobby House. And then last thing is a sentiment die from eBay. And if I were to crunch at it a little bit, inside looks really pretty clean as far as mechanisms and novelty cards go. Okay, I want to do one more because I want to do a 6x6, and so leave photos, the drill, and then I'll be back with the last finished piece. So this final piece, I took advantage of something else that I figured out as I'm creating, and that always happens. As you make more, you can figure out, well, where can you move further out and in front of your card? And so that is this strip. The only thing, instead of just having a standard replacement or a substitution strip, I went ahead and used a lacy border, and that comes from Paper Wishes. It's called 2 lacy borders, so I took one, but just be careful that because this folds down like so, when you adhere it, you just adhere it to your half-inch allowance. And so in a 6x6, kind of like similar when we went to 5 inches, when we go to 6 inches, we want to bump it up another 1/4 inch. So this first score line is at 2 3/4, and then what I want to do is come 1/2 inch again, so 3 1/4, and then 3 3/4 is that last score line. And so that will make your 6x6, and I used some nested dies again, this time, kind of avoiding that whole overhang there, and went inside, built up, and some dies from, this comes from Crate and Craft, their Windy Signature. So Happy Hydrangea, and then it comes with some Charisma sheets. And that came together really quickly. And if I prop it up, and you'll see photos, and when the user gets it, you really almost have to have that photo on the inside. And so I'm going to get to it before I finish this video because that's where I'm at. Of course, I'm going to do the envelope as well with some coordinating pattern paper on the flap. But as a novelty card, it's really fun to work with, and it looks really pretty when displayed. So I hope you took something with you can use in your own paper crafting, and I thank you for watching.